All right, so continuing on in Ein Yaakov. So we're learning, going through the Agadata. I guess we can say going through the Agadata of Shas, although it's still pretty early on. But okay, beginning of Seches Brachas. So the Gemara that we're going to learn tonight, it's I guess borderline whether it's Agadata or not. I guess it could go both ways. For the purposes of tonight, we'll call it Agadata. It's a halachic Agadata. Let's put it that way. So just to get back into the sugya. So the past number of shiurim that we've had, really since the beginning of Maseches Brachas, the first sort of topic of Agadata that the Gemara was talking about is the inyan of the mishmaros of in Shemayim, the nighttime being divided into different watches, different periods, and every shift, different malachim sing different songs to Hashem, and so on. We spoke about that. We spoke about the malachim are singing, the Rebbeinu Shalom is crying over Korban Beis Hamikdash day and night. We spoke about that as well. So, one of the things we find in Gemara, which by itself is an interesting style, but the Gemara very often does this, that if it quotes, there's certain names in Shas that are common, that are well known, even certain combinations of names that are common. Amrav Yehuda Marav. These are common, relationships between Rebbe and Talmud. But sometimes when the Gemara quotes an Amayra that's more obscure, or a relationship that's more obscure, so it'll say, okay, he quoted that, so we'll quote a couple more as well. So in the sugya of the mishmaros, of the watches in Shemayim, so the Gemara quoted in that context, it quoted a statement from Reb Zerika in the name of Rav Ami, in the name of Rabbi Shubin Levi. That's a unique shalshelis. And so because of that, the Gemara then quotes another statement from the same, Messiah. So every time the Gemara does that, the Reb Tzadok says this a lot in a number of places, that, again, on a simple level, these statements have nothing to do with each other. The only connection is it's a specific Baal HaMemra, the one that said it is the same author. But Reb Tzadok always points out that it can't be a coincidence. It has to be a connection. So just in the back of the mind, I don't have an idea what the connection is, but man, just throwing that out there, maybe someone will think of it, what this has to do with the mishmaros. But let's see together. So Marmukah number 1, the Gemara says the following statement. Again, as I said, this statement is sort of on its own. Its connection is because of the Baal HaMemra, the one that said it. Amar Zreika, Amar V'ami, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi. So Rabbi Zreika, in the name of Rabbi Ami, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Levi, said the following halacha: Ein oimrim b'fnei hameis elo dvar shel meis. The Gemara says that if, let's say, there's a body that needs to be buried, and so the halacha is, this is not talking about necessarily the relatives or hilchas avelos. This is just a new halacha, that if a person is in the presence of a mace, the halacha is you're not allowed to speak. This is what Rabbi Shimon Levi said. You're not allowed to speak words in front of a mace unless it's words that are relevant for the mace. So in other words, talk about the inyanim that are necessary for a kvura, a hesped, whatever it is, those things that you're allowed to speak. But if it's not dvarim shel mace, if it's not words that are relevant to the mace, to the nifter, then you shouldn't speak it in front of the mace. That's what Rabbi Shimon Levi said. Now, the question that the Gemara then now discusses is what category of speech are we talking about? Again, Rabbi Shimon Levi is talking about there's a type of conversation that you should not have in front of a mace unless it's relevant for the mace. But what type of conversation are we talking about? That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara brings two traditions of what Rabbi Shimon Levi was talking about. Amar Rav Abba bar Kahana. So Rav Abba bar Kahana said, Lo yamrin el b'divrei Torah. Lo yamrin divrei Torah. This whole statement of Rabbi Shimon Levi that you're not allowed to speak words in front of a mace unless they're mamish relevant, that's talking about words of Torah. So you're not allowed to say words of Torah and learn Torah in front of a mace, again, unless it's some Torah that's relevant for the mace. So if it's a hesped, things like that, or you're trying to explain what has to be done, that's also divrei Torah. That's allowed. But stam, to learn in front of a mace, that's also. Avamili de alma, but stam words, mili de alma, words of this world. That's the language of mili de alma, things of this world. Leslan ba. That's not a problem at all. Now, by the way, just a little bit on the side, when the Gemara says words of this world, like what does that mean? The Gemara is assuming that you're not just stam shmuzing. That's called bittul Torah. So so milid alma always means words that are necessary, but things of this world. Talking about parnasa, scheduling, carpools, things that need to get done, but they're not divrei Torah. So it says this is the first statement of Rav Bar Kana, the first version that Rabbi Shimon Levi is telling us. Things, again, in Yonei Olam Haza, you're allowed to speak about it in front of me, so that's not a problem. The only problem is divrei Torah, and that's taka aser. Again, unless it's l'tzayrich the mace, it's necessary for the mace, that's fine. But divrei Torah is aser to speak in front of a mace. And why is that? So let's stop for a second. Why is that? Why would that be a distinction? So in Marmukah number 2, Rashi over there explains. Rashi says, El dvar halacha, that the words of Torah is going to be the issue speaking in front of a mace. Why? Asur l'saper l'fanav, says Rashi. The reason why it'll be forbidden to speak words of Torah in front of a mace, again, unless it's necessary, shakol chayav l'saper behem, because there's a chiyav, there's a mitzvah to speak words of Torah. In other words, the mace daimim, and obviously the mace cannot get involved in the discussion. And we have this concept in other places in Shas that it's poking fun even, or it's creating a scenario where, so to speak, the mace is embarrassed. So in other words, thank you very much. So in other words, so you have so in other words, because it's such a beautiful, wonderful conversation to speak and learning, and the mace can't be involved, so it's not nice. You're making you're making the mace feel uncomfortable in the fact that he can't partake in the conversation. Avamili de alma, but again, since that's the reason, so that's only true when you're talking about words, a conversation that the mace wants to be involved in, which is divrei Torah. Avamili de alma, but if you're talking about carpools and you're talking about parnas and you're talking about shopping and groceries, things you have to take care of it, but it's not exactly Dvarim the Rumah Shalaylam. So so there's nothing embarrassing by not being involved in that conversation. Probably the people that's speaking about that don't want to speak about it. They just have to. So less than but it's not a problem. So that's the explanation again of Rav Bar Kahana, that again this issue of speaking in front of a mace. The idea is in order not to shame the mace and not to embarrass the mace, and that's only by speaking conversations that the mace would like to be a part of. That's called divrei Torah. If it's not divrei Torah, then he doesn't mind. That's the first shita of the Gemara. Let's go back on top, the last line of Marmukah number 1, V'ikad Amri. But however, there's another version of Rav Abba Bar Kahana, which is Mamash Fakert. That Omer Rav Abba Bar Kahana, the Rav Abba Bar Kahana said, Loi Amrin El Afilu divrei Torah. That Rabbi Shimon Levi's concept that you're not allowed to speak in front of the mace, that's even words of learning. The kolshkein milud alma, but certainly you're not allowed to speak about words of this world in front of the mace. That's certainly prohibited. So it's interesting. The two versions of the Gemara are mamish opposite from each other. The first version of the Gemara was making the assumption that the issue is only divrei Torah. In other words, but things of this world, I don't see a problem at all. The second version of the Gemara is, no. The problem is even divrei Torah. Certainly there's a problem with things of this world. So it's a very, very strong contrast. What's the logic behind the second svar of the Gemara? Again, the logic for the first svar of the Gemara, the first opinion of the Gemara, that's what Rashi said. The issue is embarrassing the mace. It's embarrassing for him not to be able to participate in divrei Torah. Words of this world, he doesn't care. You yourself don't want to speak about it. So what's so that would be a reason why divrei Torah is a problem. What's the ikad amri that not fakert? If anything, it's more obvious that words of this world are prohibited. What's the issue? So it's interesting. Rashi usually would come and explain. Rashi doesn't say anything, almost assuming that it's the obvious thing. Okay. Marmukah number 3, the Beis Yosef in Shulchan Aruch in the Sefer Beis Yosef, Yosef Cairo explains the logic, and it's probably what we would come up with as well. So in Yeridei Shimim Dalet, the Beis Yosef says as follows: this is the reason for the second opinion. This is where the second opinion is coming from. That kivan sha'ameis mutal ufneim, since the mace is right there, im haymadavrim b'dvarim shaloy min hameis, speaking about things that are not relevant, for the mace. It looks as if they're not paying attention to the mace in terms of taking care of what has to be taken care of, right? And so this is where the ikadamri, the logic of the ikadamri, is coming from. If clearly, if there's a mace, the things got to get moving. The things have to be taken care of. If they're just having a conversation about grocery shopping, it's not the pshat that the mace feels bad as he's not involved in the conversation. That's not the issue. But if you're talking about grocery shopping, it means you're mamish ignoring the situation. And an onlooker might think, well, maybe these are the people that are in charge of the kvura, and look at them, they're not taking care of it. Now the truth is, they might not be. It could be that there's other people taking care of the arrangements, and they just happen to be sitting there. But mechze, it looks like, to the honest, it might look like something is being neglected, and so that's where the ekdam is coming from. Therefore, it's certainly a problem to speak about grocery shopping. Divrei Torah, which you might make the argument, I have to speak about it. There's a mitzvah to speak about words of Torah. Someone else might look, okay, but I have to do my chiyuv. So that's what the Ikadami is saying, that even Torah you're not allowed to speak because of the Maras Ayin, that someone might think that this mace is being neglected. Kolshkein, words of this world, but you don't have to be speaking about anyway. Certainly it's an issue. So these are the two opinions. Again, this is the simple shot. That the first issue, the first sheet of the Gemara, the concern is more loig l'roish, embarrassing the mace, that he can't partake in the conversation, and that's only divrei Torah. And the second sheet, the second version of the Gemara is that it's because of Maras Ayin, so onlookers might think that this mace is being neglected, and that will apply to whatever the conversation is, whether it be things of this world. Certainly that would be a problem, and even words of Torah also would create that Maras Ayin. Okay, that's the two opinions of the Gemara. No, so loig l'rosh is a concept that we certainly do hold of, but for whatever reason, loig l'rosh might exist, but because this other concern of Maras Ayin, so Maras Ayin is more of the pressing matter because it includes even things of this world as well. But loig l'rosh is a concept that no one disagrees upon. There's other halachas when it comes to loig l'rosh, going into a cemetery, with your tzitzis out or things like that. But this is that's a discussion over here. Okay, so for a simple Gemara. Okay, shtugal got it to ish, sort of, whatever. Okay, so the question is like this. Whenever you have in Gemara a situation like this where you have two versions of a statement, version number one and then ikad amri, who do we usually paskin like? So usually the rule that the most Rishonim bring down a tradition from the Gainim that generally speaking, the halacha is like the ikad amri. The second version of the Gemara, the second statement, the second version is usually how we paskin. What's interesting is that over here, in this particular case, there is a tradition from the Rishonim to paskin like the first lashon of the Gemara. Okay, so take a look at Marmok number 4. This is the Rif. Rabbeinu Yitzchak Ofasi in the back of the Gemara. So it's interesting. For whatever reason, this Gemara that we're quoting is in the beginning of Maseches Brachas. For whatever reason, the Rif does not quote this in the beginning of Maseches Brachas. He quotes this later on in the 4th parak of Brachas. Okay, that's not for now. Why? But this is what the Rif says. Kasav Rabbeinu Hai Goin Zatzal. So the Rif brings down from Rabbeinu Hai Goin, one of the last Goinim, Mishmei de Kamoi, who himself quoted this from earlier sources. The Kalishna Kam Avdina, that the minig is like the first statement. So even though usually the way it's recorded in the Gemara, the halacha should be like the second, the minig oilam is like the first. It's like the first. Dein oimrim divrei Torah lifnei hameis el dvar shel meis bolvad. That again, that this halacha that you're not allowed to speak words in front of a mace is regarding words of Torah. Av mili de alma, but matters of this world, amrina, the minig is to be mekel. So even though, again, like I said, the ikad amri is usually paskin, Rav Hai Goin has a tradition, the minig is like the first. Okay. Now, this is the tradition that he brings down from Rav Hai Goin. Marmukah number 5, there's a sefer called Shiltei Gibarim. Shiltei Gibarim is an early achron on the side of the Rif. So he brings down a dissenting view. By the way, the opinion of the Rif from Rabbeinu Hai Goin, that's the Rambam, that's the Rosh. I mean, it's a whole, it's most Rishonim. Halach l'mais, that's how we pass in as well. But the Shiltei Gibarim brings down a dissenting view. Shiltei Gibarim again over there, ice base. Halach is kedas pli galzeg. He quotes the Rif that the halach is like, despite the fact that it's the first lashon, that's what we pass in. It says the Shiltei Gibarim halach is kedas pli galzeg. The halach is kedas. One of the Goinim disagrees with that tradition. V'savri she'ein amr fnei hameis el dvar v'shel meis bolvad. Fil dvar ba'alma v'divrei Torah. That the halachas kedos disagrees and says no. We paskin the tradition. It's always like the halach is like the second lashon, and therefore the halach is not to speak words in front of a mace, whether it be divrei Torah or not divrei Torah. You're not allowed to do it as well. Okay, those are the two opinions that we find in the Rishonim. So, like I said, the halach l'maisa we paskin like the Rif, the tradition of Rav Hai Goin. The problem is why. Again, in classic ruling in the Gemara, how to figure out how to paskin. So you have two members in the Gemara. The halach is like the Kedamri, especially when it comes to darbanans and things like this. We pass like the Kedamri. That's certainly true. So again, Rav Hai Gaon is telling us that the minig is the minig olam is like the first opinion. Okay, so fine, that's lamaisa what we do. I understand, but why is this? How did the minig olam develop in such a way, which is against the kolam of the Gemara? This is why, again, the Shilta Gibayim quoting from the Halachas Gedolos is not like this, because the regular ruling is that you go with the Ikadami. So what's the pshat in the minig olam and the sheet of Rav Hai Gaon of going like the first opinion? Okay, so it's again, I mean, it's not the biggest question in the world. Sometimes you have that for whatever reason there's a Messiah not like that, but it needs explanation. What's also interesting is that we do find in halacha a sort of third opinion, even though there's only two sides in the Gemara, but halacha l'maisa there is also a third opinion in the Rishonim practically how to be naik, and it's an interesting combo of both the Shainas, and that's the shita of the Torah. Okay, it's complicated. We're not going to go into exactly how the Torah learns this in the Gemara and so on, but this is how the Torah presents it. It says the Torah like this. It's again in Yordeya, in Shin Mem Daled. Ein Omer B'fnei Hameis El Devar Mishal Meis. Again, first he quotes the language of the Gemara that you're only allowed to speak in front of a mace things that are relevant for the mace, things that are necessary for the burial, hesped, and so on. Avol Shar Kol Davar, but anything else, aser. You're not allowed to speak. Bein Divrei Torah. Bein b'mili d'alma, whether it be words of Torah, words of this world, again, that's like the second opinion of the Gemara. But now the Torah says a caveat: v'davke b'toich daled amas. This chumrah that I'm being super machmer, that you're not allowed to speak words in front of a mace, divrei Torah, or anything else for that matter. That's only within daled amas of the mace. Mimamish in front of the mace. Avol chutz daled amas, if you're outside of daled amas, aser b'divrei Torah. Then you're only not allowed to speak words of Torah. So the way the Torah is making a tziruf over here is like this. We have, on the one hand, the general rule is passing like the second lashon. But on the other hand, we have this tradition from Rav Hai going to passing like the first lashon. Okay, so what do we do? So it says the Torah, here's the pshar. In Daled Amis of the mace, so then it will be machmer, and we'll go with the second lashon of the Gemara, that you're not allowed to speak even words of Torah, words not Torah. In Daled Amis of the mace, you have to be machmer. Outside of Daled Amis, then we'll go with the tradition of Rav Hai Gaon, that we go with the first lashon, and we'll only be machmer for divrei Torah. Words of not Torah will be mekel. That's how the Torah deals with it. Now that's an interesting thing, because in the Gemara we don't see any, reason to differentiate between Daled Amis and not Daled Amis. Again, in Hilchas Loig the Reish, we do find concepts of Daled Amis, of there being a distinction of Daled Amis and not Daled Amis, but again, it needs somewhat of an explanation of what's going on. Why is it that in Daled Amis then we machmer and everything, outside of Daled Amis not? Especially again, if the reason, if the logic for the first lashon and the second lashon are completely independent, Daled Amis, it might look like he's being neglected outside of Daled Amis too. Maybe, if anything, maybe even more. He's sitting in a corner, other people are just somewhere else. Mamish looks being neglected. If they're standing over him and having a discussion, someone passing by would probably think that they're talking about something that's necessary. If he's sitting in the corner and they're somewhere else, if anything, it looks more neglectful if you're going over there. So the Torah is saying that when you're outside of Daled Amis, you can speak words that are not divrei Torah. If anything, I would say outside of Daled Amis, it looks more neglectful, and therefore it should be also to speak anything outside of Daled Amis. Needs an explanation. Okay, but that's okay. That's the Gemara. That's the Nigla Digga discussion. Okay, so what we're about to explain now a little bit is based a little. I'm not going to blame Rav Kook on what I'm about to say, but inspired by Rav Kook. Let's put it that way. Okay, so it's like this. Like we said in the beginning, these two versions of the Gemara, these two versions of the statement of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. So they're both fundamentally revolving around an issue of kavod mace. We want to show respect for the mace. Either the issue was we don't want the mace to feel bad that he's not involved in a conversation that he would like to be involved in, and we would assume that the only conversation he wants to be involved in is about Torah, Or Mars Ayin, people might think that the mace is being neglected, and that's disgraceful for the mace. What exactly is it that makes this mace deserving of covet? What makes it deserving of covet? What's the source of covet that a person has? So the thing is like this. Every single one of us, let's go back to basics over here. Every single one of us is made of two parts, yeah? Neshama and guf. Neshama and guf. That relationship of neshama and guf is a very, very interesting one. The way we usually think of it, and that's the way we experience it certainly, is that the neshama is alive, the guf is not, and the only reason why the guf is alive is because the neshama is inside of it. And so life is really in the possession of the neshama. The neshama is the source of life for the guf. The neshama is this, and where is all life coming from? Rabbanu Shalom. Atem dveikim Hashem Elokeichem, chaim kol chamayot. Rabbanu Shalom is kel chai v'kaim. The Rabbanu Shalom is the source of existence, the source of life. The neshama is the entity that is connected to the Rabbanu Shalom. It's the neshama that has life. The body is disconnected from the Rabbanu Shalom. The body is disconnected from life. And the neshama is machaya the guf. The neshama gives life to the body. That's all true. So in that dynamic, therefore, that's the dynamic of body and soul. And there are certain activities that we go through in life that there are activities that are more neshamadik, and there are activities that are more bodydik. There are conversations that are more neshamadik. There are conversations that are more bodydik. What are conversations? What are sugyas? What are inyanim that we're involved in that are more oriented to the neshama? Every Torah mitzvahs, yeah. What are activities that are more oriented to the body? Carpools, right? Parnasa, grocery shopping. These are inyanim that the neshama is not very interested in. These are sugyas. Those are sugyas of the body. Those are sugyas of the body. And so memela, we therefore have a certain understanding, which is Bachar Pashut, that Divrei Torah are Keim Chayin of Archamein, Divrei Torah, Mamash, Chai V'Kaim. That's the source of Chiyas, the neshama source of Chiyas. Where is the kavod of a human being coming from? Now you have this nebuch, this mace that's in front of you. There's Allah to be mechabed the mace. We don't want to make the mace have any design. Why? What is the body deserving of kavod? The body. Why is the body deserving of kavod? Therefore, the Pashta says that you're right. The only reason why we give kavod to the body is because there was a house for the neshama. The neshama is no longer in it. The answer is true. The neshama is no longer in it, but there's a klal in Pnimis Atar. There's a klal in Yiddishkeit that any place that once contained kedusha, once contained an element of elikos, even when that kedusha is drained out of it, there's a residual effect. So first of all, the body, the fact that it was a house for a neshama for 120 years already means that it was affected by the neshama, at least to a certain degree. And it's deserving of kavod mitzad the fact that it was a house for the neshama. And even when the neshama leaves the body, this is a big sugya in Mekis Ari, and it reflects itself in the halachas of Avelis as well, is that it's not just like instantaneous, that the neshama just goes to Gan Eden and finished. The neshama leaves the body, that's what happens, and therefore the neshama at that time of the petira, after a person passes away, the neshama is described as a makif. It's described as a light that surrounds, that's not necessarily constricted by the body, but it's still hovering in that space, so to speak. And it takes time for the neshama to get used to not being bound by a guf. Similar to a person who, let's say, was on a boat for a while, and then you go on dry land, there's a little bit, like, seasickness or whatever. It takes time to orient to a new environment. So the neshama has been in a body for 120 years. Ad kedei kach, that for the 120 years, primarily it thought of itself as body. So it takes time for it to orient itself. Oh, 1 second, I'm a piece of the divine presence. That's a chiddush. So it has to orient itself. So during that time of orientation, it's still kind of here because this is where it's comfortable with, although it's not held back by the body. And so when there's a mace, the simple explanation, the the way we would think of it is that, again, the guf by itself doesn't deserve any kavod. It's something that's completely disconnected from life. It's nothing. So why am I giving it kavod? It's the neshama. Both because the neshama there's a residual effect of the fact that it was a house for the neshama for 120 years, and even now it's true that most of the neshama is already gone, but at least a part of the neshama is hanging out over here. This is a little bit you have to give kavod to the neshama. That's one explanation. That's one reason why you would give kavod, and that's 100% true. Mitzad the hasagas of Olam Hazeh. But here's the chiddush that we find in Primus HaTorah, and it's hinted to in many places in the Kisvei Ari. Although the Arizal talks about this in his language, Chassidus this is brought out much more clearly, which is that entire dynamic of thinking that the neshama is the source of chiyus, and the body is the opposite of life, and it's the neshama that gives life to the body. And memela, it's only divrei Torah that are words that are words that have any inherent value to them, and every other discussion that are oriented to the body are just like the body is just functionarily necessary to allow the neshama to do its thing. Okay, so there has to be parnasa in order to allow divrei Torah to happen. This is all pre-Tchias HaMesim. The chiddush, what we find the chiddush, when Tchias HaMesim takes place, we know Tchias HaMesim, according to the Kabbalah, person after Tchias HaMesim, they live forever. So what's pshat? What's the change? What's the change? That in this world there's such a thing as mortality. Tchias HaMesim, all of a sudden there's no death. So stam, like really things should be forever, and it was an einish of death, or things should be. There should be, there should be mortality, and it's like a chiddush. There won't be. What's the explanation? Is that what's going to happen with the coming of with Tchias HaMesim is a complete reorientation of the entire system. Instead of thinking that it's the neshama that has life and the body doesn't, what's going to be revealed with Tchias HaMesim is a much more sublime truth, which is that it's true that it's the biggest side in Chassidus that I've mentioned many times, is that there's always two sides to our experience with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Again, the Rebbeinu Shalom is a source of life and a source of light, and there's always two sides k'viyachol to the Rebbeinu Shalom. There is what's called the Or of Hashem, the light of Hashem, the Or of Hashem, the energy k'viyachol that comes from the Rebbeinu Shalom, and then there's k'viyachol the Rebbeinu Shalom himself. Now, again, when I say the words Rebbeinu Shalom himself, I don't mean mamish himself, but to a certain degree, the Rebbeinu Shalom k'viyachol, it's always with k'viyachol. It's always with k'viyachol. In this world, all that we could possibly experience and all that we could possibly connect to is light of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the practical energy that comes from the presence of Hashem. That's what's called the presence of Hashem. In that context, the neshama is certainly more in tune with the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom and the light of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And therefore, in our world, pre-Tchias HaMesim, the only connection we have is with Oirei Yisbar, with the light of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The neshama is the balabas, and the guf is not. The chiddush of what's going to be with Tchias HaMesim is that there's going to be a revelation k'viyachol of what's called, by the Svarim, we'll see in a second, what's called in the Svarim, Helam Ha'atzmi, the hidden essence. The Rebbeinu Shalom himself, k'viyachol. Not his presence, but the Rebbeinu Shalom himself. Now, the amazing thing about essence is that it's what we're going to see. We're going to see about this in a moment. And again, this is a very big sugya, and it's a very deep sugya. So we're only just going to be touching the surface and giving a few ma'amakamis about this. But what the amazing thing about atzmusa k'viyachol is that if there's anything that's more shaykh to be a house for the essence of the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's, if anything, the guf, not the neshama. If anything, it's the guf, not the neshama. And what's going to be revealed with Tchias HaMesim is that even though it's true mitzad Or, mitzad the presence of Hashem, the neshama has the presence. But in terms of what side of reality is in truth the vessel in which the Rebbeinu Shalom's essence is present, that's the guf. And what's going to happen with Tchias HaMesim is an inverse. Is that instead of the neshama being the source of life, the neshama is going to just be there to explain to the body what it is, and to explain the body what is housed within it. Because the essence, kiviyachal, this madrega of atzmusai, of essence, is so sublime and so profound that it's by its very definition unseen. It's by its very definition unseen. Think about any single one of us. I mean, the only thing that we know about ourselves is really our own thoughts, right? I mean, what do we really know about ourselves? Not mamish nothing. The only thing we know about ourselves is what we can tell ourselves about ourselves. But who are us? Your thoughts. So you have two things. So either you know what I mean. So either it's like who you are, which is blank. I don't even know how to begin. Or it's what I'm thinking about. So in this world, our entire relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom is what he reveals about himself through his thoughts, his wills, his actions, and so on. And that's neshama. That's neshama territory. And the very essence of physicality is concealment, is hiddenness. And so if we're completely oriented, if all we're thinking about is the Rebbeinu Shalom in terms of revelation, then the neshama is connected to God and the body is not. But once there's going to be this discovery that essence, by its very definition, is hidden, then what's going to happen is a complete v'nahapechu, that everything that's more natural and it's more of a shidduch with hiddenness and concealment is actually exactly where more essence is. And everything that's revelation is really just there to give context to the essence. All thoughts that we have, you can look at them as two things. Either think of them as independent things, okay, that's just a thought, or they're there to let you know that there's a thinker. So if you hear someone calling from outside the room, so it tells you two things. First of all, there's the sound that you're hearing, and whatever the message is. But obviously, I mean, it happens automatically, so we don't have to think about it. But obviously, it goes without saying that sound also tells you there's someone there. So that sound, you could look at that as just focus in on the sound itself, or the whole purpose of that sound is just to tell you that there is someone behind the door. So when we talk about the neshama is the neshama is the tool, the neshama is the sound of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Right? V'yipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. The Rebbeinu Shalom breathed into Adam a soul. Breathing means, like you speak, it's coming from your, it's your blow, it comes from your lungs. It's like you're blowing in an instrument. That's where neshama comes, the word neshima, breath. So the neshama is like the sound, is like the breath of Hashem. When you feel a breath, so again, there's the breath itself, but there's also, the breath is also telling you that there's a breather. Before Tchias HaMesim, the musig of the etzem breather, of the fundamental of the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, Kiviyachal, as the one that's breathing life, is so unknown, is so mysterious that the entire relationship we have with God is just mitzad the breath. And therefore the neshama is the ikr. And the body, what is the body? The body is nothing but concealment. The body is nothing but something that's coarse, that's limited, that you can't see through. It's the difference between neshama and guf is neshama is gilui, and guf is hela. Neshama is revelation, is somethingness spiritually, and the body is concealment. So in our orientation, well, concealment means nothing. But when Tchias HaMesim takes place, what is Tchias HaMesim? Tchias HaMesim is not the Rebbeinu Shalom breathing harder. Tchias HaMesim means that there's going to be a revelation that all of the Rebbeinu Shalom's breath, don't focus on the breath, focus on the fact that what this tells you in terms of that there's someone that's breathing. And so in that context, then all of a sudden everything's going to shift. And so where is this breather found? Then the madar, the place, the territory in which the breather himself can be found is dafka in places that are more custom made for concealment. Whereas the places of revelation, namely the neshama, that's just there to give context to the concealment and to indicate what's going on in the concealment. So as what happens by Tchias HaMesim is that the guf becomes the ikr and the neshama becomes secondary. After a person passes away, there are two ways to view the situation. There's the way all the people that are Baruch Hashem, are alive and well. There's the way they view the situation, which is always from the eyes of pre-Tchias HaMesim. But the person himself, that Lo Aleinu was nifter, he's already in the process of Tchias HaMesim mode. He's already in the process of getting ready for Tchias HaMesim. So when we think of this situation, I have to give kavod to this mace. Why? Is it mitzad the neshama? Is the neshama the source of the kavod? Or is it the guf that's the source of the kavod? Well, that depends on your orientation. If you're thinking pre-Tchias HaMesim, it's the neshama that's the source of the kavod and nothing more. But if you're thinking post-Tchias HaMesim dik, which really you can't, because that's not what you're holding. But if you think about it from the perspective of the mace, where is he holding? What type of consciousness is the mace moving himself towards? Then from that perspective, the source of kavod is not the neshama. The neshama also, don't get me wrong. Neshama also. But primarily, the ikr source of kavod is the guf. So let's go back to the Gemara. The Gemara said that you have to show kavod to the mace. And speaking words that are not dvarim shel mace is a lack of kavod. So the first language of the Gemara was, Rav Barkana said that issue is only speaking words of Torah. Mili d'alma is not a problem. Said Rashi, why? Because what type of conversation does the mace want to partake in? Divrei Torah. Doesn't want to talk about grocery shopping. The second lashon said, no. What are you talking about? You can't even Divrei Torah. You can't. Of course, you can't speak about grocery shopping. So we had it's such an interesting dynamic. So we said, okay, so it must be that you're right in terms of making the mace feel bad in terms of what conversations he's not partaking in. That's certainly the first lashon. Why is the second lashon say that even grocery shopping is also that the primary problem is grocery shopping conversations? So the Beis Yosef says so it must be because Maris Ayin and so on. Alpi Pnimius, no. Alpi Pnimius is completely not. Both lashonos are fundamentally revolving around the same thing, which was what Rashi said, is that you're speaking words that you're making the mace feel bad that he can't be part of this conversation. The first lashon the Gemara is speaking from the perspective of pre-Tchias HaMesim. From pre-Tchias HaMesim, what part of this mace deserves kavod, and what part of this mace is alive right now to even have any shaykhis to whatever else is going on? It's neshama. What's the body? Body's nothing. So what type of conversations is going to make the neshama feel bad? Neshama take a conversations, divrei Torah. So you talk about grocery shopping. The neshama doesn't care about grocery shopping. There's no tachlis to grocery shopping except for allowing the body to function. And maybe the neshama can do its thing. But comes the Ikadami says that's all true mitzad olam hazeh. But from the perspective of Tchias HaMesim, it's mamash fakir. The ikr conversation the person in Tchias HaMesim mode wants to have is about parnasa. Divrei Torah also. But primarily he wants to talk about mili d'alma. Because it's mili d'alma, so this is the difference. When you're thinking in terms of pre-Tchias HaMesim, Divrei Torah is Gehem Chayenu, and Mili d'Alma is Choshech and concealment and death itself. And so, if you're thinking Mitzad Olam Hazeh from our perspective, then of course the only conversation that would make the mace feel bad is Divrei Torah. But if you're thinking about it Mitzad Tchias HaMesim, then it's Mamash Fakir. Mili d'Alma is terrible for the mace to hear Mili d'Alma, and he can't talk about it as well. He's Mamash. Also Divrei Torah. Because the neshama also is bakavidik, but the guf. It's because of this, let's understand this, it's because of this that even though it's true usually, we pass like the Ikad Amri. But in this context, the Ikad Amri is coming from a perspective of post-Tchias HaMesim. And the perspective of post-Tchias HaMesim is not shaykh to everyone else that's reading the Shulchan Aruch. It's only negate to the mace himself. And that's something that the mace can't, everyone else, the halacha always is oriented towards, we can't paskin based on an orientation that's beyond our hasaga right now. And so even though it's true, the fact that it's recorded as an Ikad Amri is that is the truth. The truth, the pneumistic truth is that even that right now, there is a tchias amesim dikimitzias behind the scenes. So the truth is like the Gedamri. But halach l'maisa, how do we fear? How are we naig? We can't live in such a way. The way we live is with the eyes of pre tchias amesim. So even though it's true that the Ikadami says that you can't speak, that it's not bakavidik, it's disrespectful, it's making the mace feel bad to have conversations about things of this world, and he can't be involved in those conversations. But that's a post-Chias Mason mentality. The only hasaga that the halach l'maisa, we go with the first lashon, and this is where the tour. Remember the tour? The tour had the interesting pshara. In Daled Amos of the mace, can't speak about grocery shopping. Outside of Daled Amos, divrei Torah. Why? Within Daled Amos, that's the place of the guf. The guf is in a specific spot. Daled Amos is the place of the guf. So in that place of the guf, then you have to respect the guf. And what does it mean to respect the guf? It means to not speak about things of this world because you're making the guf feel bad. Because now this guf is already in Tchias Amesim mode. And in Tchias Amesim mode, it wants to speak about things of this world. If you're outside of Daled Amos, that's not the place of the guf anymore. What are you in front of outside of Daled Amos? The neshama. Because they said the neshama, after the person passes away, is a makif. It's a surrounding light. It's no longer constrained to the body. It's not limited to the Daled Amos of the body. Outside of Daled Amos, the only thing that you have to be paying respect to is the neshama. As far as the neshama is concerned, divrei Torah is the only conversation the neshama wants to have. So says the Torah, outside of Daled Amos, the only conversations that are making the mace feel bad, that he can't be a part of, is divrei Torah. Within Daled Amos, then not just the neshama you have to worry about. You can't make the body feel bad, and you're making the body feel bad by talking about things of this world, and it can't be part of that conversation too. The body the whole 120 years he's been kvetching about his parnas, and now all of a sudden you tell me he feels bad about not being able to talk about it anymore. He's been speaking about it his whole life and kvetching about it. The answer is yeah, but now he realizes what type of elikus, what type of level of divinity was contained in those mili d'alma. And now the body wants to talk about it again. This is, by the way, the side of what we find, one of the most amazing shittas. There's a big discussion in the Rishonim. There's contradictions back and forth in Chazal. There's a famous line in the Gemara says, Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. That learning with making a parnas is good. When you're involved in both, you don't have time to do averes. You're just too busy. So that's the Gemara says. So the question the Rishonim deal with is Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Torah is good with derech eretz. What does that mean? So which one is the ikar? Whenever you have such a statement in Chazal, something with something else, A with B, is A the ikar or is B the ikar? So there's a well-known sheet of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is quoted by the Rishonim in a number of places, in the Darim, other places. Rabbeinu Tam said, he quotes a bunch of places in Gemara to prove this, that whenever the Gemara says such a language, A with B, B is the ikar. Therefore, says Rabbeinu Tam, when the Gemara says Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, it means derech eretz should be ikar and Talmud Torah secondary. So all the Rishonim say Talmud Torah should be secondary. So the whole tachas of life is the retire came chayinu v'archemenu. What's going? How could Rabbeinu Tam say such a thing? Okay, so there's the case. So some say Rabbeinu Tam was talking about for most people, of course, yichidei skula, all the apologetics. Rabbeinu Tam said such a thing. Yafet Talmud Torah derech eretz. That derech eretz is the ikar, Talmud Torah is tafel. From a post-Chias Mason perspective, that's 100% true, because everything that's involved with being mili d'alma is the root with that's the domain, that's the madar, that's the house k'viyachol for elokus. Divrei Torah is there to bring it out. Divrei Torah is there to give context to it, to explain what is happening in that place of that's called mili d'alma. But in terms of what's ikr, what's tafel, it doesn't mean that divrei Torah is secondary in terms of lack of chashivas. But in terms of what divrei Torah are about, what divrei Torah are, think about it, even on a very simple level, right? Divrei Torah, it's such an amazing thing because Torah is the ikr. Torah is obviously it's mamash. But what is Torah about? Torah is telling you how to function in the world. So it's such a funny thing, right? It's counterintuitive. We're just used to it because we went to yeshiva, so We're used to it. But if you think about it, just sort of just take a step back for a second. You're telling me that all of Torah, which is telling me how to function in the world properly, that the learning about how to function in the world properly is more ikr than how to actually function in the world properly? It's a little bit funny, no? Wouldn't you think that the how to function in the world properly is the ikr, and the words of how to function, how to do that is going to be secondary? But the answer is this is the dynamic. What Divrei Torah are, from a post-Chiyas Mason perspective, is the illuminating, the hidden essence that is contained in Alma. So it's like the fire is Divrei Torah, but the fuel, but where is that fire coming from? The wick, the oil, it's all coming from Mili de Alma, ironically. Isn't that true even within a person, right? The Rebbeinu Shalom made the human being in such a way, it's not just us, but a human being in such a way that we're the top of creation, right? Doimen, Sameya, Chai, Medaber. But yet, ironically, what sustains us? By eating things that are lower than us. Isn't that ironic? You would think that if a human being, if Medaber is the top, then why would Medaber only be able to survive by eating mushrooms, or eating vegetables, or eating chicken? Everything that's beneath the Medaber. So the answer is that the Baal Tanya makes this point in many places in Likutei Torah, is that this is already hinting to the secret, which is that ironically the whole inyan of Divrei Torah, which is the Medaber, right? Chazal, Adam la'amal yulad, human being was created to put in effort to work. And Chazal say la'amal peh, to be Medaber. And the Gemara says, any day, I'm not sure, it's an amazing medrash. Reb Tzadok quotes this a lot, this medrash. Medrash says, again, the person is created to work, and work means to speak. Says the Gemara, so I'm not sure what does it mean to speak what? Words of Torah or stam words of this world? The Gemara says, the Medrash has a question. So the Gemara says it means it means words of Torah. It means the whole definition of the Medaber is the one, that's the crowning jewel of a person, is that we're the ones to speak words of Torah. But ironically, our ability to speak words of Torah is coming because of lettuce. So it's a Mamash Appella. The answer is because lettuce is mamish concealed. It's the opposite. We don't see the Rebbeinu Shalom's presence in lettuce. The only strata of creation that's able to express and be a vessel to really reveal Hashem's presence is the human being. We could speak about Hashem, we could daven to Hashem, we could talk about Hashem, we could learn. It's the Medaber. So is that where the Rebbeinu Shalom exists and everything else is concealed and holding us back? No. The answer is the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Atzmusa Kivyochel, is dafka in the place of concealment, and Divrei Torah is there to give context to it. That's the secret of Rabbeinu Tam. This is why B'chatz Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is we're in the beginning of brachas. The first time Rabbeinu Tam is quoted in Shas. It's the first time Rabbeinu Tam is quoted in Shas. The first Rabbeinu Tam that's quoted in Shas is the Chiddush of Rabbeinu Tam. The Chiddush of Rabbeinu Tam that day and night. Could be both at the same time. Ovid Kamar Ovid, that sometimes, you could have Mincha Ma'ariv back to back at the end of the day, before sunset, right before, and you can say it's night, you can say it's day. Ovid Kamar Ovid, Rabbeinu Tam Zman. Rabbeinu Tam Zman is already pretty dark. Rabbeinu Tam says, it's still day. Still day. And what looks like the sun is out, Rabbeinu Tam says, it could be night. So Rabbeinu Tam is doing. Rabbeinu Tam is that secret of Tchiyas Mason, which is night, day, revelation, concealment. Everything what you think is light and what you think is dark, what you think has the Rebbeinu Shalom's presence and what you think it doesn't. That's the secret. That's the secret of this Gemara. So even though that's going back, these two languages of the Gemara, they're both 100% true, and the Ikad Amri is even more true. It's even more true. But the level of truth that the Ikad Amri, the second language of the Gemara, is revealing is such a deep truth that it's not shaykh to tfisas ha'olam. The world can't comprehend it yet. So the Hanhaga is like the first sheet. But what's the truth? The truth is always like the Ikad Amri. It's always like the Ikad Amri. That's why even the Ikad Amri is without it. Why don't you tell us who said it? Ikad Amri. There are those that say it. Ikad Amri. Those that say you can't. This is the first Ikad Amri that's quoted in Shas. It's the first Ikad Amri. Ikad Amri means there are those that say almost they're too shy to admit it that they're the ones that said it. like that. So that's the sort of the Gemara again. Yeah.
Yeah, we just pass like that.
Huh? We usually pass like the Ikadam. In this case, right? In this case, with the Ikadami, this particular Ikadami is such a side. It's such a side. You have to believe in Tchias Mason, but we don't live with Tchias Mason. If a person lived with this philosophy of Tchias Mason, that would cause a lot of problems, right? Because then everything that's Choshech is the Iker, and that'll cause a lot of problems. So that we can't do. That we can't do. You know, it's everything has a way of balancing itself out. You know, before the last goals before Mashiach is America, right? That's well known from Chaim Volozhin. So it's interesting in Europe. The minig of most was, the Vilna Gaon was not like that. So you had the base measure of the Gaon was not like that, but the minig, Svardim, Chassidim for sure, even a lot of most Ashkenaz, and it says in the Shulchan Aruch Paschal like Rabbeinu Tamzman. That was the Hanaga. It means even Lakula. It means that you were able to it was not Shabbos until Rabbeinu Tamzman. That's what it was. In America, the minig is not like that. People are machmer like Rabbeinu Tam, right? They're not going to. Many people are not going into this mana, but none of us are maker like Rabbeinu Tam. No, against Rabbeinu Tam. We're all machmer like Rabbeinu Tam. But to be maker like Rabbeinu Tam, to go to keep on doing malach until Rabbeinu Tam's man, the minig in America is to be machmer. It's an interesting thing. It's because that's always the thing, right before Arish Mashiach, which is introducing this world of Tchias Mason in a very, very strong way, which is Hashem Echad Shmai Echad, where Chayshach is really the source of all light and the source of all the Helam Ha'atzmi, the concealed essence. That's going to be the place. If that truth is so intense, reverberating back from us with Mashiach, that Klal Yisrael intuitively have to put up certain Gedarim within ourselves to make sure we don't go crazy with it. And you see already with all the Gedarim set up, the world is still losing its mind in terms of what's up, what's down, what's light, what's dark. It's as we get closer to Mashiach, that energy of Rabbeinu Tamzman is very, very intense, and it's turning everything upside down and inside out. So as a mizgeres, as a gather for that, Klal Yisrael intuitively, with obviously the leadership of Gedal Yisrael, came to the conclusion that at least in America, which is the last stop before Gulz, which Vamev and Yavin is a place where a lot of Mishagas come from in terms of the bilbul of Choshech and Or. That's the whole line of America is bilbul, is confusion, is that there is no, the whole line of America is like that. So that if there's any place that's going to be extremely, that's a very, very open door for this gilui of Choshech is Or and Or is Choshech and these types of things, it's Dafka before Mashiach comes, and it's Dafka America before Mashiach comes. So in order to set up that together, to make sure that it doesn't go crazy, we're not making like a Rabbeinu Tam. We're not making like a Rabbeinu Tam. That we'll be machmer like a Rabbeinu Tam. We're not going to make a lakula. Day is day, night is night. That's the way it goes. It starts getting dark. That's nighttime. Rabbeinu Tam says it's not night yet. We can't allow ourselves to think like that too much before Mashiach comes. Otherwise, it'll get too crazy. So you put up these gedar. That's the secret of Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, so Hashem should help us. We should be zeichet to, I guess, keep this mana properly. I guess that's the point of this. I'm not sure, but okay, we should be zeichet to keep this mana properly and be zeichet to see the Gula Shleim Amitis, V'Vias Gal Tzedek, Meher V'Yameinu Amen.